17,500 feet beneath the vast Pacific, a sleeping giant waits in silence. The USS Hornet, once a proud titan of the American fleet, now rests in the cold darkness, her steel hull scarred, yet still standing tall. For 82 years, she kept her secrets buried, a monument of courage and tragedy sealed beneath crushing pressure. The deep stillness hides echoes of engines, alarms, and voices that once filled her decks. But before the silence came, Hornet was a symbol of defiance, a ship that helped change the course of World War II. Her story begins far from the sea, in the roaring shipyards of Virginia. The story of the USS Hornet begins not on the open sea, but on the roaring docks of Newport News, Virginia, in 1940. Sparks showered from torches as men in sweat-soaked coveralls shaped raw steel into destiny. Around the nation, the heartbeat of industry thundered, from Gary's rolling mills to the steel foundries of Pittsburgh and Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Every plate forged, every rivet hammered, carried the weight of a nation preparing for war. By the fall of 1941, her frame towered over the docks, a 20,000-ton fortress of power and promise. The air smelled of oil, metal, and anticipation, as shipwrights polished gun barrels and engineers tested catapults. On October 20th, crisp uniforms lined the deck, brass bands echoed across the harbor, and the stars and stripes unfurled in the breeze. The USS Hornet, newest of the Navy's fleet carriers, was officially commissioned. She was built like a heavyweight champion, broad, fast, and unyielding. Beneath her decks lay workshops, ammunition elevators, and hangars wide enough to cradle an entire squadron. The men who served aboard her felt it instantly, the mix of pride, fear, and reverence that came with standing on the edge of history. Hornet wasn't just another carrier, she was a symbol of what America could do when tested. None aboard could imagine that within 6 months, her flight deck would host one of the most daring operations in military history, a secret mission that would shock the world and turn this new ship into legend. Barely 6 months after her commissioning, the USS Hornet became the stage for one of the most audacious missions ever attempted at sea. Her flight deck, designed for nimble naval fighters, now groaned under the massive weight of 16 Army B-25 bombers. These land-based giants, nose to tail across the planks, looked impossibly out of place. Sailors and Army airmen worked shoulder to shoulder, tying down cables, securing propellers, and checking bomb shackles in total secrecy. No one had ever tried to launch bombers this large from a carrier at sea. Even seasoned pilots doubted it could be done. Yet leading them was Jimmy Doolittle, a legend of the air, calm and sharp-eyed, moving down the line to inspect each crew.
Ignition on.
He spoke few words, only nods and brief smiles, the quiet confidence of a man who knew courage was their only fuel. April 18, 1942. The sea churned gray beneath storm clouds. Hornet turned into the wind, her deck pitching with every swell. Each bomber had barely 467 feet to reach flying speed. One wrong move, and they'd plunge into the waves. Doolittle gave the signal. Engines screamed. The first B-25 thundered forward, rising just above the bow as sailors below held their breath. One by one, the rest followed. 16 roars fading eastward, carrying America's first counterstrike toward Tokyo. The men left behind stood in silence, watching until the horizon swallowed the last speck of silver. In that moment, the Hornet was more than a ship. She was defiance made steel, a vessel that carried not just planes, but a nation's wounded pride and rising hope. 2 months after the Doolittle Raid, the USS Hornet sailed once more, this time into the crucible of Midway. The Pacific had become a vast chessboard of strategy and sacrifice, and every move could decide the fate of nations. On her flight deck, squadrons of SDD Dauntless dive bombers and TDD Devastator torpedo planes were armed and fueled, their pilots silent beneath the roar of engines and the rising morning haze. Among them was Torpedo Squadron 8, commanded by Lieutenant Commander John Waldron, a man who knew what awaited them, but pressed on without hesitation. At 7 a.m., 15 Devastators lifted from Hornet's deck, engines straining as they headed straight into the teeth of the Japanese fleet. With almost no fighter cover and outdated aircraft, their odds were impossible. Yet not one man turned back. Minutes turned into eternity as they dove through a wall of anti-aircraft fire and intercepting Zeros. Explosions stitched the sky, planes disintegrating before they reached torpedo range. 15 launched, none returned. Out of 30 airmen, only Ensign George Gay survived, floating for hours among wreckage and oil while watching the Japanese carriers burn. Their sacrifice, though tragic, drew enemy fighters low, opening the skies for the dive bombers to strike from above. When Hornet's dive bombers found their mark, 4 Japanese carriers fell within 3 days. Midway became the turning point of the Pacific War, a victory carved from chaos and courage. But for the Hornet's men, it was also a day of loss. Pilots' bunks sat empty, lockers remained untouched, their names never erased. In the silence of her hangar decks, the crew understood what victory truly cost. By August 1942, the USS Hornet was no longer one among many. She was the last American carrier standing in the South Pacific. Her sister ships were gone, and the ocean around Guadalcanal had become a battlefield of attrition. Every day brought a new alarm. Enemy bombers overhead, torpedo wakes slicing the sea, and the constant blare of general quarters echoing through steel corridors. Sleep was measured in stolen minutes, courage in how long a man could keep moving. Day after day, her air crews launched to cover the Marines fighting for Guadalcanal. They bombed supply lines, hunted Japanese ships, and fought off relentless Zero attacks. The price was constant. Planes returning riddled with holes, pilots bleeding, or sometimes never returning at all. On deck, the crew patched craters between sorties, the smell of burned fuel and salt thick in the air. Below decks, men wrote quick letters home between raids, hands trembling from exhaustion. In the mess hall, meals were silent except for the hum of generators and distant explosions. The crew had stopped counting victories. They measured survival in days. Every face carried the same haunted look, the knowledge that Hornet might be next. Yet somehow, through the exhaustion and loss, the Hornet's crew endured. Each takeoff, each repair, each night watch became an act of quiet defiance. The ship had become more than a weapon. It was a floating testament to endurance, holding the line while America gathered its strength. But fate was already closing in, and the next time Hornet faced the rising sun, it would be her last battle. October 26, 1942. Dawn broke over the Pacific with a low, distant hum. The men aboard USS Hornet knew that sound too well. Enemy aircraft. Within minutes, the horizon filled with specks that grew into a swarm. Bombs began to fall before anyone could count them. At 9:10 a.m., the first explosion ripped through the flight deck, sending shards of steel and fire raining across the ship. Explosions tore open hangars and ruptured fuel lines. filling the air with smoke and the sharp stench of aviation gas. Flames rolled down corridors slick with oil. Men carried the wounded through choking fumes, shouting over the roar of collapsing bulkheads.
Watch the overhead, keep going.
Then came the kamikaze. A crippled dive bomber slammed straight into the island's superstructure, setting the bridge ablaze and silencing communications. Captain Charles P. Mason, uniform soaked and face blackened, walked calmly through chaos. His voice, hoarse yet steady, echoed down the burning decks as he directed damage control teams to seal compartments. Below, engineers fought rising water in the dark, the hiss of steam mixing with the groan of twisted steel. But by midday, power was gone. No lights, no radios, no pumps. The Hornet drifted helplessly, flames still clawing at her heart. Surrounded by circling enemy bombers, Captain Mason gave the hardest order of his life: abandon ship. As dusk fell over the Pacific, the USS Hornet drifted, broken, burning, but still afloat. Her decks were torn open, her engines silent, yet the ship refused to die. From the nearby destroyers, sailors watched their carrier silhouetted against the flames, a wounded Titan surrounded by black water and drifting wreckage. Orders came down from command. Hornet could not be left for the enemy. She had to be scuttled. The destroyers Mustin and Anderson moved in, launching torpedo after torpedo, 9 in total. Each white streak sliced across the sea, exploding against her sides, but still she refused to go under. Shells rained from every gun, over 400 rounds, ripping holes through steel and tearing into her decks. Yet the Hornet, divided by armored compartments, resisted like a warrior unwilling to surrender. Night deepened, and silence fell between bursts of gunfire. The destroyers withdrew, their fuel low and crews exhausted. Then, from the east, 2 Japanese destroyers appeared, Makigumo and Akigumo. Without a word, they loaded their deadly long-lance torpedoes. Just after midnight, 4 silver streaks cut through the darkness. A series of thunderous explosions followed. Hornet's bow rose high, fire spilling from her ruptured decks, before she finally slipped stern first beneath the waves. It was 1:35 a.m. on October 27, 1942. 21 aircraft went down with her. The stars and stripes still waved as she vanished into the deep, defiant to the very end. For 82 years, the USS Hornet lay hidden beneath 17,500 feet of Pacific darkness. Time eroded her paint, coral claimed her decks, yet her silhouette remained unmistakable, proud, upright, eternal. Then, in January 2019, the research vessel Petrel scanned the seafloor near the Solomon Islands. Sonar shadows appeared, massive, angular, and hauntingly familiar. When the remote cameras descended, there she was, the Hornet, still guarding the silence of her fallen crew. Her signal bridge still stood, her hull scarred but proud. Around her lay aircraft, tools, and twisted metal, a time capsule untouched since 1942. As the lights of the ROV swept across her deck, the room aboard Petrel fell silent. Some whispered prayers, others wept. The long wait for answers was finally over. The discovery closed a wound left open for generations. Families finally had a grave. Historians finally had proof. And the Hornet, once the tip of America's spear, now rests as a silent monument, proof that courage and sacrifice never fade, even beneath the weight of an ocean. The Hornet's story reminds us that true strength isn't measured by how long we stand tall, but how we rise after every fall. Like her crew, we all face storms, loss, and darkness. Yet even when everything seems lost, the legacy of courage we build can outlast us. So whatever battles you're fighting today, stand your ground. Your perseverance might become someone's inspiration tomorrow.